proceedings for the day. And before we begin, let me request someone who has given the presentation. They may be the reporter for today, and they may create a report for what happens today. Uh, we, Junaid Ali.
Yes, sir.
So please prepare a report of what happens today. Be the reporter for today.
Okay.
All right. So let us begin the proceedings. We have the first group of presenters, Maryam and Nidal. Okay, so over to you.
Oh, would Sampar give us the gift to see ourselves as others see us? It would from many a blunder free us, and foolish notion, what airs in dress and gait would leave us, and even devotion. A very pleasant morning to one and all. My name is Nidal Ahmed, along with my partner Maryam Zakir Khan, and we are here to present the article The Power to See Ourselves by Paul Gibro. Now, before we dive into the article, let us know a few things about it. The article Power to See Ourselves was published in HBR magazine in 1964. It was written by Paul Gibro, who was a consultant psychologist to management. And the article emphasized on learning and growth through self-realization. Now let's have an overview of the slides. Now this is quite deep and interesting concept, and I request you for your full attention. And before we start, and I promise you, at the end of this presentation, you will be a different person. So let's begin. Now, each one of us has a self-image of ourselves. We may see ourselves as smart, bold, slow, or intelligent, or introvert, extrovert, and so on. So these multiple self-images influences our behavior, as well as they are linked to our personal growth as well. Hence, this self-concept is crucial in managers' development too. The purpose of such development is to help individual managers to grow. After all, they have to do most of the job themselves only. But the author says that in his experience of being a psychologist, he realized that no one can tell managers how to grow. Well, then the question arises, then how to ensure managers' growth? If you've been listening carefully so far, you must have realized the answer to this, and that is by tapping into the self concept only. One can only help managers to understand themselves in their own situation and trust them to find the best directions for themselves. Now, let us understand how this works. Let's go in deeper into this self concept. Let's take an example of a businessman. This businessman goes to Dubai on a business trip, and few months later he visits Dubai again, but this time on vacation as a tourist. What he realized that both these times his experience was entirely different. Although the Dubai remained the same, but he saw his self images were different each time. But the first time he saw himself as a business delegate, and through that lens only he saw the Dubai through that lens. And in the second time he went as a tourist, and his experience was different entirely. So we can say that everything we perceive is influenced by how we see ourselves. And moreover, we project this self image into our actions and decisions as well. Consider a business executive who see himself as bold and confident, and he thinks that he is able to dissolve any situation. And his actions and decisions will also portray the same thing. Therefore, the shift in the self image is very important for a person's growth. Now, change in behavior is a constant phenomena. With each passing day and experience, we go through reversible changes in our behavior. And when these changes are desirable, we call them growth. From the management's perspective, there are largely two ways to bring about these desirable changes. The first one being through management training, and the second one through self-actualization. Now let us take another example here. A newly appointed manager from a team, he was a team subordinate before. Now he got promoted to a manager, and the company puts him through various training programs, various tutorials, seminars, and so on. And with his new status and this new skills and updated knowledge, he we can say that there must have been some substantial change and growth in him. But these changes are, as the author says, these changes are only simple level changes. And if the company wants to incur deep driven changes, it can be achieved only through self realization. And so management development is actually self development, and deep growth implies change within people. But is it that easy to bring about changes and go through just self realization? Actually, not. And there are major barriers to it. Now, let us look at the barriers to growth. The first one being the conflict and self concept. Now, let us take another example here. A man sees himself as a businessman and he is also a father. So, there are two roles in his life that he has to play. And if these two roles are in harmony with one another, then he will definitely progress. But if one role is suffering because of the another, and this conflict will hinder his growth by and large. The second barrier to growth is unrealism in self concept. As the picture may give you a hint, the false perception of oneself or unrealistic image of ourselves will not let us grow. And rather, you may face demotions due to underperformance. Well, while we thought that we had done good and we were good enough and we have done enough. And the third barrier to growth is natural resistance. Now, if you think, like, if you're convinced that you can't change or you can't grow or you're too old to learn the new ways or you are incompetent in some way, then your mind will conjure up resistances to change and growth, and that will be a very major barrier. And now I call upon Maryam Zakir to explain us the steps to maturity, which is basically a sequence to growth. So, Maryam, over to you.
Please unmute yourself, Maryam.
Am I audible now?
So, these are
Yes.
the steps to maturity.
All right. Good morning. This is Maryam from MBA IB, and I will proceed with the topic of steps to maturity. Let us be clear about one thing. Growth does not proceed in clear cut, discrete, or logical steps. Sometimes it occurs in unexplainable spurts, other time in agonizing slowness. There are cases where real learning is so unconscious that no change in behavior is shown for a long period of time. The process of growth is nebulous, multifactorial, fluid, dynamic, often astonishing, and usually only partially controllable. For the sake of discussion and understanding, we can presume a sequence of steps for growth, maturity, and development, which includes six steps, that is, self examination, self expectations, change in self expectations, self direction, broadened perceptions, and self realization power. Let's begin with self examination. Self examination. People see themselves every time they look in the mirror, but do they really examine what they see? Do they appraise and evaluate what kind of humans they are? Do they study what kind of people they are? The function of self examination is to lay the groundwork for insight, without which no growth is possible. These insights are building block for growth. But what exactly is insight? These insights are real, genuine glimpse of ourselves as we really are. An example of an insight is a supervisor enrages over a subordinate's sloppy work. The moment the subordinate realizes his mistake leads to change in behavior. This, oh, I see now feeling is called insight, which sometimes is either consciously or unconsciously. Secondly, is self expectation. What is self expectation? Well, it is nothing but our expectations of ourselves that derives us to excel. Individuals lay their insight into direction in which they want to grow, but as they see themselves in a particular respect they do not like, they change their self expectations. Example: Daisy was a chronic complainer. She often had complaints like, why does this always happen to me? She frequently rebelled against her boss, her subordinates, her peers, her competition. One day, in a meeting of executives to find answers for a particular crisis, She kept on saying how her department couldn't be blamed. After she stopped complaining, the whole group, perhaps in complete disgust at her immaturity, sat in silence. The silence became so oppressive that it suddenly dawned on her that she was just a complainer, immature complainer. Her insight finally occurred. She was ready to begin to grow out of her maturity. Now her growth could be self directed. Thirdly, we come to change in self expectation. How do people get a new self demand, a new self expectations? How do they find out that their self concept is inadequate? How do people know not only they can be different but should be as well? Unfortunately, for those people who like recipes or formulas, such questions are bothersome because there is no best way. In the business concept, the need for growth is greatly influenced by tremendous source of insight. In fact, anything which enables person to get a new perception, be it reading, observing, studying, going to conferences, attending meetings, participating in clubs, can provide insight into themselves. Out of insight comes change in self expectation. Example: Catherine was self critical to the point where her fear of failure immobilized her. She delayed decisions, fussed endlessly with details, and generally strained to be perfect because it was safer to be free from criticism and failure. But she finally rejoined the human race and demanded of herself only that she could only do her best. This insight that she was a human after all fed her to change her self expectations. Next, we come to self direction. The change in self concept must continue primarily towards self direction. People are masters of their own destiny in the sense that they take charge of their own growth and development. You can't blame an individual who has no desire to grow because a person can only grow as they want to and as their own insights will enable them to. For example, the desire is infinitely stronger if a person seeks development because they want to develop, not for the merely fact that they want to please their bosses or what is too expected of them. As any teacher knows, the pupil who learns and listens merely in order to pass the exam are far poorer learners than those who want to learn. Next, we come to broaden perceptions. The dynamic of this factor of growth are very clear. People must see themselves in relation to their environment, be it personal or impersonal. A person must develop their image of themselves in response to what they see around them. A most common complaint of superior is that subordinates are too narrow-minded in their outlook. For example, a sales manager promoted to a vice president of sale irritate his peers in manufacturing or research or be it any department by having only a salesperson point of view. One should have broadened his perception of job and of himself. Lastly, we come to self realization power. It is not enough, however, just to see ourselves as we are of now. We must see ourselves of what we could be and grow into that person. One must unfold their potential and be their real selves. The strong people of history have set great examples for us. Beethoven continued to compose his music even after he became deaf. Milton, who didn't allow blindness to interfere his writing. Keller became a lecturer on opportunities for handicapped despite being both deaf and blind. Such people have added meaning to the phrase fulfilling one's destiny. Lastly, we come to the conclusion that perception of self image influences one's behavior. Thus, changes in the self concept are to be realized. Development begins with the ability and to see and evaluate oneself. And lastly, growth is evolvement of personal goals, considering with job goals or company goals. That's all from our side. Thank you and have a good day.
Right. Thank you, Nidal. Thank you, Maryam, for a good presentation. So we'll come back to the feedback and the evaluation in a bit. So let us now move on to the next two presenters. We have Muhsin and Aisha.
Yes, sir. Sir, am I visible and audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. Today, I, Mohsin Siddiqui and Aisha Khan will be presenting an article on building an ethical career by Maryam and Kochak. So, what is an ethical career? Some of you might be wondering. And some of you might also be thinking, hey, let us figure out our career first, then we will look at this ethical part later. But this is important because if you don't look at this, you will eventually become the part of the crowd who don't look at this as a moral obligation, as you can see in the examples in the next slide. Goldman Sachs cheating their own client, Wells Fargo, foreclosure crisis, Barclay manipulated Fed rate. Everyone else was doing it, why we left behind, that was their motive. And everybody has their perspective of an ethical career, but not everyone is right. As very rightly told by Nidal in his previous presentation, unrealism is self-concept. So everybody dreams about a job in a dream company, but not everybody is aware that working in a dream company comes with a great responsibility. As one of my friend whose dream was to do a job in a top consultancy firm, which came true, but it came at the cost of losing work-life balance, which made him do some things that which was not good. So yeah, setting your goals and values are very important. Yes, the corporate is such a big mess. If you don't act appropriately and set your values and goals, it can steal your joy of working there. I know what you all are thinking. It is tough. It is tough to digest some of the things on a Thursday morning before getting the job. The job market is dangling here and there, and you are talking about ethics and morality in this 21st century. But believe me, this will help you right in your career ladder. So you don't need to worry. We will give you a clear image of what are do's and don'ts while building an ethical career. In this article, Kochaki and Smith explain how planning to be good is the foundation of building an ethical career. In short, they recommend taking control of the four things. First, cultivating moral humility, preparing for a challenging situation, maintaining your calm at the moment, reflecting on how well you have lived up to your values. So those who want to build an ethical career should approach with a three-step process. First, prepare in advance for moral challenges. Second, make good decisions at the moment. And third, reflect on and learn from the moral successes and failure. All begins by discovering your core values, as Carl Jung said. The only meaningful life is a life that strives for the individual realization. Moving on to stage one, planning to be good. Most of us think of ourselves as a nice people, but good intentions are not enough for building an ethical career. As Jordan Peterson eloquently said in his famous book, 12 Rules for Life, and I'm quoting, first set your own house in order to criticize the world, before criticizing the world. Second, social and psychological processes and biases impact moral judgment, which we then try to justify, which is human nature. And research into cognitive biases that impair human judgment has mostly been applied to the area of economic decision making, ethical decision making, and has been comparatively neglected. To avoid the above thing, we have to accept the moral humility. That is, we can transgress, not just eliminating bad, but inculcating good. This tendency to overestimate the virtuousness of our future self is a part of what Ant and Brunsell of Notre Dame and colleagues call this as an ethical mirage. To eliminate the previously mentioned bias, we can look for our strength, weaknesses, values, and vulnerability. In MBA, we are often told to make as many connections as possible, as our network is our network. But unfortunately, nobody told us to make a connection with someone with good ethical moral conduct. So yeah, make connection with not just successful, but with similar values. Choose mentors for ethical advice to avoid any missteps. Second, stay vocal about your ethical intentions. Subtle moral signaling, avoid ambiguity. Moving on. Morally fit environment brings satisfaction and productivity because ethical stress decreases motivation, job satisfaction, cost, turnover, fatigue. As I have told earlier in my introduction part about my friend who got into a top consultancy firm, but he was not happy. So to avoid the above thing, we have to do a research on our part. Doing research on the industry, we can go for a Glassdoor or LinkedIn to check our ethical background of the ethical moral conduct of the company. And long working hours is inevitable. Excessive cognitive demand, long working hours, consecutive demanding goals can cause ethical behavior extra care to be taken during these period of intensity. So yeah, from now onwards, Aisha will navigate through the presentation. So Aisha, over to you.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Mercy, and good morning, everyone. I will resume the presentation from the second stage of the approach. The second stage for building an ethical career, according to the authors, is making good decisions. So, this stage is the implementation of stage one, where you actually do what you have planned, as planning is not just enough to face ethical challenges. Sometimes we overlook the implications and consequences of our actions and try to rationalize our immoral and self interested behaviors. For example, preference to your referred candidate over the other candidates in an interview. And other times we face a dilemma when the right choices are not obvious. For instance, the conflict between two of your close colleagues. To cope up with such situations, okay. So to cope up with such situation, we must stop traditional calculations like cost benefit analysis and return on investments. We should also look for moral issues and ethical implications in given options through various philosophies. Philosophies like rule-based perspective of deontology. Then there is which in which we identify what rules are relevant and cannot be compromised. Consequence-based perspective of utilitarianism, where we evaluate the outcomes and the number of people impacted. The third is the Aristotelian perspective of virtue ethics, where we need to reflect a virtuous person. All these three philosophies with the decision criteria of rules, consequences, and virtues can help us to prevent the overlooking of the ethical choices while making decision at the workplace. As we know that we humans are expert in justifying questionable ethical behaviors, especially when tempted by personal gains. We escape our conscience by self-deceptive rationalizations like I'm just following my boss's order, or maybe they deserve it, and or maybe like it's for a greater good. So we can help ourselves in this regard by following the three tests. First one is the publicity test, in which we ask ourselves if we are comfortable to let the choices and the reason behind our choices to get published on the front page of a newspaper. Second is the generalizability test, where we ask ourselves if we are comfortable to let our decision serve as precedent for all the people facing the similar issues, situations. Third is the mirror test, in which we look into the mirror and introspect if we really want to be the person we are looking at. So, if the answer to any of these questions is no, then we should definitely revisit our decision and the logic behind it. Studies reveal that people are more likely to take unethical decisions while feeling rushed. So we are not able to decide correctly in the moment. For example, we cross red lights when we are running late for a lecture, or we break a queue when it's too long to get our work done. As a solution to this issue, we can try to be aware of time pressures and delay decision making to form a perspective. So this delay will help us to consult our mentors, and in their absence, we can always use the previously mentioned three tests. But the ethical challenges do not end here. Taking an ethical stand requires opposing your colleagues and even seniors. Studies show that people are susceptible to social pressures, and due to which they can behave irrationally. So, in situations like these, we should use our minds and not follow the herd of sheep. We should not do anything just because everybody else is doing it. We should take ownership of our actions, as we are accountable for us and nobody else. So, as similar problems would have occurred in the past, code of ethics could be consulted for a solution. And if unavailable, a complaint could be filed through an ombudsman program. And above all, taking guidance from our mentor is an evergreen solution to ethical issues. Now we move forward to the third stage, that is reflecting the fact. As very rightly said by John Dewey, who is an educator and philosopher, by the way, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. Ethical people are not born perfect. They do make mistakes, but they review and reflect to avoid them in repeating in future. So reflection is the first stage of learning from the past experiences. It not only helps us to avoid repeated transgressions or violation of ethics, but also identity segmentation, which is following different ethical values for our personal and professional lives. But every rose has its thorn, and reflection is no exception. It is fortified and guarded by personal biases and perspective. So, in this case, we seek the counsel of the people we trust and take feedback from them. We ask specific and situational questions and welcome their suggestions with open hands. We should avoid being defensive as we are not here to prove ourselves. And lastly, we should be grateful to them for their time and insights. We should also indulge ourselves into a concept called job crafting. That is designing our job or work in a manner that it becomes more impactful and helps us to fulfill our potential. It can help us to make our job more virtuous. And with this, we come to the end of the presentation. And I would like to conclude that pursuing an ethical career is more difficult than what we think. We face moral challenges at the workplace every single day. But where there is a will, there's a way. By following this three-stage approach, we can ensure an ethical career. And in short, preparation is the key. Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Mohsin. Thank you, Aisha, for a very good presentation. And there are two very powerful articles today we have discussed, and we will discuss it further. But let us now go back and try to assess the performance and have some feedback on the first two presenters. So we'll start with Nidal. So Nidal, what do you think about your own performance?
Sir, I think we could have done more rehearsals and more practice, so it would have been more impactful. And I could have made the presentation more engaging with the audience by putting up questions and keeping it interesting.
All right. Uh, some good reflection points. Your topic was more about self-reflection, so very good. So what about Maryam?
Um, I agree with Nidal. We could have practiced more, and we could have engaged, not engaged, but we could have presented our presentation in a more nicer way. So, yes.
Now your voice is much more clearer now, actually, Maryam. That was in the presentation. So anyway, I'll come back to some comments, but let us hear from others. What do they think, and how both of you may take some advice from others. All right. So let us hear from others.
Sir,
What do
may I?
you- Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, I think what I have seen Nidal, he has improved so much in these 2 semesters. I have seen his first presentation. Now I am watching this, so I can see that he has done a lot better job now, and he's also improved very much.
Very good. Yes. Yes, very nice point, and I think it should be noted. So anyone else who would like to comment on Nidal's and Mariam's performance? Any suggestion? All right. So there are some comments on chat also. Okay, Hamza is saying simply perfect. Um, okay, interesting and enjoyable. Okay, very good. It's very encouraging points by two of your batchmates. So it was good. Some people are saying okay. Now, I really like the way you started, actually, Nidal, the attention getter. And you started with a quote and to get the attention of the audience. And these things are very important, especially in today's era, where participants and usually the audience is distracted by mobile phones and other stuff which is going on around them. So it is a responsibility of the presenter to take care of this aspect. I really liked the attention getter, and also the way you, in the very initial phase, you explained that what's in it for them. So that's a very, because everyone is here because we are fundamentally selfish people. So we all want something for ourselves. So if we have something to take away, then I think we will pay attention, and that is what we should keep in mind as presenters. So give something to look forward to. So I really like that part also. The visuals which you used were appropriate, and a lot of pictures were used in your presentation. In case of Maryam, also you were, both of you were expressive. Both of you were fluent, had good command over language. Uh, the only thing which I like you said that you could have practiced a bit more, because Maryam was uh, basically not loud enough, I would say. But now I think I don't, because now I can make out that the problem is not with the audio connection or anything. So it was just maybe in the flow that you did not remember to be louder. Also, like just Mama has pointed out that pauses and voice modulation can really help. And both of you used very lot of examples, and I really like those examples. However, if you can make these examples a bit, you can say, more concrete. Say, for example, instead of a manager, you can characterize the person. Say, for example, take anyone from your class and make them a manager. So now what happens that we can all relate to that manager. So that's what happened. So instead of a third person like a manager, you can just characterize that person, characterize that thing, and then it will have much more impact. So these were the few suggestions which I noted. And we'll come back to the content. It's very, very powerful article and very famous article. So let us move to the next two presenters, Mohsin and Aisha. What do you think, Mohsin?
Sir, I think I should be very subtle regarding my presentation, how to present, because I was very overacting at that some point. So I could use that part and improve on that, because it was my second presentation in MBA. So I I need to improve more.
Okay. Yes. Aisha, what do you think?
Sir, since nobody is perfect and there is always a scope of improvement, what I noticed after watching the first presenters, that in my part especially, I missed some examples. I could have added more examples in my part. That was more my part was very theoretical in nature. So more examples could be added. Could have been added.
Okay. So any suggestions for Mohsin and Aisha?
So I think they have themselves covered their points, and I would like to say that the way the camera was placed in Mohsin's performance was really good, because we were able to see his hand movements and all. So we should keep it in mind for next presentations also.
Yeah, the appropriate distance between you and your camera. In fact, the placing of the camera can help you because many a times we miss lot of non-verbal cues. So to be expressive, many a times you need your hand gestures and movement, and so that works. So nice point. So others may also note it. Uh, Many times I have seen that people not sitting while giving online presentations also. I have seen that people like placing it as somewhere and then standing, like they can show it the first, at least the upper half of their body, and they're standing and they're delivering the presentation. That is also a good style of giving presentation. In fact, I've seen teachers taking classes like that also. I'm thinking of doing something like that.
Sir, actually, it was part of my strategy, but I think that if something went wrong, so what we will do? So I rather
Yeah,
go with the setting.
you need to prepare
Act-
the setup first for that.
Actually, he was planning to stand and give the presentation, but we avoided that.
Yeah, you need a proper setup. In fact, you need to do
Exactly.
some recording beforehand and see that how it is going, how it is looking, and all these things. So it's good. Now, overall, I found the presentation very good, especially the first half of the slides were like they were appropriate in the sense that the text was appropriate. There's not too much text, especially in the Mohsin's part. But in Aisha's part, I think the text became too like heavy in the slides. So you may have a relook at it. Though the design and the graphics and all these things were very good, but just have a look at it. Yeah, Mohsin, in general you have a conversational style. Okay, so when you are talking, when you are giving presentations, so I would not advise you to change that style. Yes, yourself noted down that you can avoid the over dramatization if you think that it's going beyond a point. So you can just limit to that. But the conversational style is a very good style. I don't see any harm in it. So what is more important is the expression. So if you are expressing properly, that is more important. So I would not advise anyone to change their natural style. Okay. So everyone cannot be Steve Jobs. Everyone cannot be say Narendra Modi, and in terms of the style. So everyone has their own style. So just focus on what your strengths are, and look at what are things which you can like really be like improve. The the second thing is that as far as the content is concerned, so I would have loved to see a little bit more simplification of the complex ideas. I think that is the point which especially you, Aisha, has already pointed out that she could have used more examples, and I'm happy that you yourself noted these things, because sometimes, like for example, Aristotelian styles and all these things, from the audience perspective, uh, the complexity of the idea may basically be sometimes too much for them to grasp. And so, as a presenter, our job is to simplify those ideas. Okay, and that is a job we can only do once we have good comprehension. If we comprehend the topic or the article very well, and then, in fact, you must have heard about a very famous physicist and a Nobel laureate, Richard Feynman.
Yes, sir.
Richard Feynman always says that the test, he has given a test, Richard Feynman test, it is called. Okay, and what is this test? That to know that whether you have really understood anything, so explain that idea to a child. Okay, if the child can understand that idea, if you can explain that idea to a child, then you have really grasped and the idea properly. So that is his test. It's called Richard Feynman test. Uh, but that is again, I would say that it's a process. It's a craft that we will have to develop. I'm happy that we are all on the right track today, and I'm really happy with all the performances. So very good, all four of you, and I hope to see people now getting charged up, and I see that some healthy competition going on here, and and the others who are going to present now, they also take note of some lessons from the presentations we have had till now and take the bar higher. Okay, so very good. Okay, now let us come to the content here. The content is again the first part, which is about self-concept, the power to see ourselves. It's a very famous article, uh, and it talks about that. In fact, I would say that the central theme of that article is about understanding oneself. Okay, and this uh, tendency we have and this conflict we have within ourselves is actually, if we just reflect a bit, all of us reflect a bit, we will realize that this the issue of the self concept. There are a lot of things which are going inside our minds about ourselves, and we all have this notion of how we look, how others see us, and how we see ourselves. Okay, so this is there's a conflict which is always there, and that is this central idea of self-concept, that we have multiple selves within our own self, and how do we navigate this process? So there are uh, this author talks about that there's always this impediments which are called psychological resistance, which happens, which basically you can say they impact our own thinking about ourselves. And there are some ways in which you can develop that maturity. And there are 4 5 steps which we talk about, like self-examination, examining yourself, knowing yourself better. And in fact, when we did that exercise, who am I, in the very first few classes of business communication, that was our intention, that we get into the self-examination mode very quickly. Okay, and the better it is, if we are on this, if we know ourselves better, that's the first stage of maturity. And then have the right kind of self expectations. Am I better than this? Can I do this? So right kind of self expectations, and then self appraisals. Maybe an inside out approach or an outside in approach, taking help from outside also. So all of this boils down to our strength to change. Basically, can we change for the better? Can we broaden our perceptions? Can we learn from others? Okay, from our experiences. And once we do start doing it, we are in on the right track to a good, you can say, becoming a better human being and improving ourselves. So in the life of a manager, companies, they go for management trainings. They try to basically give you leadership trainings in between the different kinds of training interventions, they are called. Okay. Usually, once you go in the organizations, you will realize that majority of these trainings are not taken very seriously by the employees, and they think that it's a fun time, it's a free time. Yeah, it is. Most of the trainings are designed in a way that it is fun, but the learning has to be there. And the people who take this time off as a time for self-reflection are the people who sometimes do better, in fact. So this article talks about such things, and it's a very interesting one. I would recommend everyone to read it. Kamran is talking about a book, Psycho Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, which talks about self-image and all. Oh, I've not read that book, but if he is recommending it, if you have read that book, Kamran, thank you very much for the suggestion. I hope that the people have noted it. And the second article, in fact, again, a very interesting one, building an ethical career. And, the content of this article is also very, very interesting, because everyone today is talking about building a career. But like Mohsin said, that nobody talks about building an ethical career. Okay, because we are in so much hurry that ethics is left behind. And usually like in the Aisha's part, she has explained that usually it is a time when we are in making decisions in a hurry that we forget about ethics and we just compromise on ethics. And today, the world is actually in a fix. In a fix, we see so many scams, so many crises because of, you can say, there's a concept called moral hazard. Moral hazard. And we have become so greedy. And the greed is taking over. It's like what Parvez sir always says, that the, the problems of affluence. So the people who are getting affluent, and we are seeing white collar crimes, and at a level where nobody has ever seen it. In fact, in 2008, when 2008 financial crisis happened, after the financial crisis, there was a very interesting conference which was organized by a lot of these top business schools of the world. Harvard, Stanford, and Princeton, and all these Yale, all of these top business schools, Ivy League, we call it Ivy League. So Ivy League college professors, they all came together because one interesting and one very disturbing fact from the 2008 financial crisis was that it was all engineered by the MBAs from these colleges. The people responsible for the 2008 financial crisis were the students from these Ivy League colleges. So they had an introspection that what are we teaching? And is it that we are making unethical managers? So that is a question which every business school has to look over, and every individual. So ethics have now become very important part of the curriculums. So we are trying to basically inculcate among our students that when you are choosing between two things, and sometimes choosing between two things is not easy. It is not black and white. Most of the time, our life is in gray. And once you cannot see things in black and white, how do you make decisions in gray? That is where your ethics, your morality comes into play. And if we are not conscious of that, we may fall in that trap of this chalta hai attitude, which we call it. Okay, Are yaar, chalta hai. And I never thought about it. What's in it for me? These kind of attitude actually takes over. And we tend to flow. We tend to basically just go with the flow. And in the end, we realize how sometimes bad mistakes we made. Now, when this presentation was going on, I was remembering actually some books by Mahatma Gandhi, especially his book, My Experiments with Truth, and in fact, he has written a lot of books on this, and one of the very famous book is book Hind Swaraj, which he has written way back. And I read that book when I was during my graduation days, and I remember a very interesting and a very powerful sentence which he has written in that book. He says that your business morality should be the same as your religious morality. And I find this very hard to believe and I to see in practice. If we look at what is happening in this world, our religious morality is different. When we are in front of God, when we think that we are in front of God, when we are in temples, when we are in mosques, we are very, very ethical. We tend to preach a lot of things. But the moment we sit on the chair, change our role to a businessman, say for example, or a shopkeeper, how this morality changes. So that's what he said. And again, I really like the title, My Experiments with Truth. So it is, nobody is born perfect, and nobody will die perfect. So that is it's a journey, and an ethical person will always learn from, do an experiment with themselves and learn, and then even we call him the father of the nation. Now, the scenario is thus that I think a lot of people don't agree even with that nomenclature for him. But I find him, yes, he has failed miserably in influencing a lot of people. But there were still significant things which we did which were very, very difficult. In fact, which nobody could have thought. And that was because of this continuous struggle which he had with himself. And I think that is one thing which we have to learn. We may agree with the philosophy of non-violence or not. That is okay. But what we should respect about Mahatma Gandhi is that his continuous struggle with himself. And in fact, if you look at the leaders who have been really able to change the course of nations. So I find that the last leg of this leadership died with Nelson Mandela actually in the world. After that, I don't see any leader in the world. That's my personal opinion. I'm not imposing anything on that, but that's my view. But if we look at these personalities like Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi or someone else of that era, or in fact in India it died with Jayaprakash Narayan. These people were, if you look at their personal life, you will realize that how tough the choices have been for them and how they stood up to these. And that's why we say that learning history, correct history is very important. Okay, learning from these personalities, how they navigated these challenges and the worldly pressures they had, sometimes standing up against the people who were their colleagues, who were their peers. And that is, I think, a hallmark of an ethical person. So this article again, and in fact, this article is kind of a prescription which gives you ideas about how should you pursue an ethical career, and it's a very powerful article. So please go and read this article. All right. So with this, we have come to an end, and thank you very much for your time and sort of good class today. And request Junaid to send the summary, and hopefully see you on Monday. Take care. Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. Sir? Excuse me, sir, I have a query.
Yes.
Sir, regarding weekly report, I want to know what should I include in the weekly report?
Yeah, you should include the main what happened in all the what were the articles covered, what were the main themes of that article, who all presented, and what were the key. I would not say that all the specific feedback which was given to everyone individual, but you can there's a general feedback, okay, for about the presentation slides. You can compile that in a
Okay, so just the key points and feedback.
Yeah, key points from the article, the content, and the general feedback, like what can be the key takeaways for the people ahead.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.